Welcome back to ASTRAD Talks, the podcast where we break down what is actually moving the needle in programmatic and the advertising industry. Today's guest spent 16 years building marketing engines that scale, including 7 years at Google, where his team generated over $2 billion in pipeline. He's the founder of 12th Agency, a fractional ABX agency designed to help fast-growing B2B companies hit their ideal accounts and build qualified pipeline in under 3 months. We're looking at why traditional outbound is broken, how to actually penetrate a 10-person buying committee, and what it means to build genuine presence over surface level reach. Steve Armenti, welcome to the show.
Wow, thanks, Daniel. That was a really kind introduction. I appreciate it. And I'm psyched to be here and dig into today's topics.
Awesome. Great. Fantastic. So let's get started then. When you say that you have to be in the room with the buying group, right? Could you explain a little bit what does that mean? Because a lot of people, I believe, when you say that, still think, an email is fine, right? That's as long as I get there, that's completely fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is a good one because you can take this figuratively and literally. And so, literally what I mean is you actually want to get in the room with the buying group, right? Like that's what your sales counterparts want. And so as a marketer, when you flip your mindset to, is this activity, is this message, is this campaign, is this tactic going to move us closer to getting sales in that room, then you're moving in the right direction. And the second part of that is what I hear all the time from clients and just other, marketers that I talk to is they'll do a really good job of engaging one person, maybe two in the buying group. And then sales gets pissed because a deal still doesn't progress because little did you know there's some blocker somewhere, a financial decision maker, a security decision maker, right? And so that's the whole thing behind ABM and multi-threading and getting into the buying group is you're almost trying to hedge against the fact that at some point, that proposal you put in front of your core contact is going to go to someone else for approval. And you need to get ahead of that, right? Make them aware of you and your company and your value that you provide at least. And, more literally to me, and we can get into the tactics here, but that's when you think about the classic, one-to-one, one-to-few, one-to-many type ABM programs. And so, one-to-one is going to get you in that room, right? If you're hosting dinners, if you're taking your prospects out to golf, or what we've been doing lately is a lot of, personal signal-based experiences. So, booking real life experiences for people like, going out on tours and, private cooking and golf and that type of thing. That's how you physically get in the room, but then how you digitally get in the room is a whole approach to how you segment your campaigns and use signals. And, hopefully we'll get into that today.
Yeah. Absolutely. That was a great explanation. That was perfect. So usually a buying group, as we know, in average consists about, let's say, 6-10 people in average, right? We've got massive companies, but let's take that as a reference. So based on what you explained, why are agencies and companies still focused on let's go onto just one inbox, one person at a time instead of a whole strategy surrounding that buying group?
Yeah, honestly, I love this question, and I thought about it, and something that came to mind for me is you're familiar with the scarcity mindset, or like you kind of like
But let's explain it just so everyone is aware of it.
I think of like scarcity or like pessimism, right? I think that marketers, and I don't know where they inherited this from, but they often think about, okay, I need to execute this thing and then get to the end goal, which is like a meeting, right? I'm going to send this email and I'm going to bluntly put a demo request. I'm going to ask for a meeting, right? I'm going to jump right to the end. It's the same. I love the analogy of, you don't just walk up to a stranger and say, do you want to get married? Right. There's a series of things you need to say hello. You need to find out who they are. Like you need to build a relationship, go on a date. Right. And so I don't get why sometimes we jump right to the end. And I think that's a failure we see, especially with outbound email direct of any kind, whether it's from marketing or from sales, right? We send one email, we jump right to the end. And then the next email, we hit them again and we ask for something. And we're constantly asking the buyer to do something for us when we've done nothing for them. And so I think, you can blame the channel. And I'm very vocal about this. I crap all over outbound email all the time because, at a macro level, it is underperforming. But what really matters is what you send to each inbox. And I think, something I've seen done well, which is pretty cool, if you're patient, is when you multi-thread into a buying group and you use the information you have about each person in the buying group to facilitate your messaging. And so what I mean by that is, let's say you have a chief procurement officer in the buying group who doesn't make a decision, but for a fact that there's always a CPO who's going to, be at the end of that request. Your core buyer, let's say, is the chief data officer. So what you're going to do is take some signals. Hopefully you have a little bit of data about that chief procurement officer, maybe what makes them tick, what they care about, their pain points. You're going to go to that person with that type of message. And you might even say, hey, I'm just putting this on your radar. I want you to be aware of me and my company while I continue to prospect into your data team, right? Just be honest and do that, right? And then on the flip side, you're going to your chief data officer and their team and using a similar approach, but you can be a little bit heavier and, trying to deliver some value, whether that's offering them, a gift, an experience, a piece of content of, something value driven, inviting them to a webinar or, event, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Interesting. Definitely. And still sticking into ABM, right? So now we're going more a little bit in terms of the execution. That's something that we see quite a lot, programmatically, at least on our end. From your perspective, what's the failure mode, let's say, that you see when an agency is saying that they're doing ABM, but when you look at the strategy, you see it's just an extra layer that is not really ABM. Just as a quick example, I'm going to put on our end, we've got agencies that come to us and said, yes, we want to run ABM campaigns. They upload a list and it's 20,000 accounts in that list. Well, there's no logic behind that, right? Yeah. So from your perspective, how does that work?
Yeah, I think it's a symptom of, maybe 2 years ago, let's say, right? When, AI became a thing, Clay became a thing, AI driven GTM, outbound tools, Instantly, Smart Lead, Warm Lead, like there's all of these tools that very quickly made it easy to send volume at scale, like super easy. And we've set up dozens of these things for clients, right? So I'm not saying like we're perfect. A year ago we set up a bunch of these things. We realized oftentimes they don't work and we had to augment and change the strategy, which I'm happy to talk about. But I think when an agency says, hey, we can do ABM for you, and then you start looking behind the scenes and the list size is 10, 20,000 accounts, like you said, and thousands and thousands of contacts. If it's just ads and cold email, no matter how fancy you make that sound, at the end of the day, it's just ads and it's just cold email. Like when you're targeting 5, 7, 8-figure deal size, that doesn't work. That doesn't convert prospects, right? So I think those are some of the things to look for. But really, I think it's, honestly, it's a clever approach by some of these agencies who built some success doing cold outbound. My gut says they realized that this isn't working. So then they started rebranding and saying, we can do ABM. Now they can do LinkedIn ads. We can set up a Clay, workflow that's going to scrape commenters and then send them cold emails. I mean, I've seen, tested, tried all this stuff myself. It works great, honestly, in a founder-led startup environment. I do a bunch of this stuff myself with like my own LinkedIn and my own website, but it absolutely does not work in enterprise or mid-market. And so I think that's something to look out for if you're a company that's going after 6 figures, multiple buyers, 3-6 month type deal cycle, somebody who comes to you and says, hey, we're going to run LinkedIn ads and then we're going to scrape all the commenters and we're going to send them emails. And then when they get on your website, we're going to track it with our B2B. Then we're going to send them emails. We're going to put the scoring system in place. It's a lot of smoke and mirrors. Like, I'll tell you, you could set that stuff up yourself. It's not that hard and it's
Yeah.
not that expensive. Like that's not ABM. That's, call that scaled demand gen with some clever AI. I mean, I have respect for it, but it doesn't work in enterprise.
I totally agree with that. And one of the things that you said in the explanation is about volume, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you are openly anti-volume, right? Not just shout and make noise for no reason, but that might sound counterintuitive to some people. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you actually influence those buying groups without more volume? So what's the strategy? Do you just add more channels? Do you refine the strategy? How do you do it?
Yeah, yeah. So I am anti-volume, especially lately, and for a few reasons. There's some external reports that I started seeing published, and I started looking at, and then I started looking at other reports, and I conducted my own sort of meta analysis of a bunch
Mhm.
of reports from like Apollo, Zoom Info, Instantly, Gartner, and there's a few other brands that
Yep.
publish some data. And what's interesting to me is Instantly, one of the most popular AI driven outbound email tools. I use it. I literally have it open on my desktop right now. It's sending emails for me. We could talk about how that works, but
Yep.
they own the game, right? And they published a report that showed a 50% decline in reply rates for cold emails year over year.
Wow.
So a company that facilitates this is tracking and publishing that it's declining, right? So I think that's one input. There's like, okay, something's not working there. The second thing I noticed within our own clients last year was we were setting up these systems, and keep in mind we also do a lot of like mid funnel life cycle, and so our whole goal is like from
Right.
impression all the way to meeting and every touch point. But we do use cold email in there, especially for smaller teams that don't have large sales force. What I noticed is that the typical playbook and the typical personalization wasn't working. So
Mhm.
you see it, right? You probably get hit
Yeah.
with these emails all the time. Hey, I noticed XYZ. My company does X. Would you like a demo? Right. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's completely dead. That motion's dead. And so you have to get creative. We started using webinar invites. We started using podcast invites. We started using dinner invites, happy
Mhm.
hours, like local type stuff. So we use the channel still, but we use it differently to try to get
Right.
people to engage. And so, those two things got me thinking, well, the industry is struggling. Clients, prospects, marketers, everybody I talk to continues to tell me how hard it is to generate demand from these
Mhm.
poor scaled channels. And I thought there has to be a better way. And so I ran a couple of pilots with some clients where I call it, signal based experiences, where we are super anti-volume. We might do this
Yep.
on 20 to 40 contacts at a time. And we take AI agents to go and actually research individuals, but we're looking for personal signals. So like
Right.
hobbies, likes, interests.
Mhm.
What do they do outside of work? Like Daniel, we popped on and you mentioned the cigar thing in the background,
Yep.
right? Like
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
if I maybe had a photo of you online somewhere and I saw that somewhere, I might
Mhm.
I might think you're a cigar aficionado. Your
Yeah.
office looks really nice. It looks like you might be into that. So I could glean that information,
Yep.
and we might send you something related to that, maybe a gift card or maybe a private
Oh.
tour of a humidor. And so that's the kind of thing we're doing. And quite frankly, it doesn't scale. The research does scale, but the management of it doesn't. And that's why I
Yeah.
still employ humans that
Mhm.
validate these signals. They book these experiences, they fulfill them, work with prospects to tell them where and when to be and all that sort of stuff. And so I think that's where I am anti-volume, because it works, right? You can actually
Totally.
communicate to 30, 40 people with that type of approach, and you'll get responses from anywhere from 30 to 50% of those emails.
Mhm.
And what channel can you get that from? You can't. So I'm very bullish on that approach. But I will say, I do think, because a lot of people question me and they say, you're so anti-volume, like you have to hit scale at some point. And it's, yes, I know, but scale is in more of the one to few and the one to many, right? I
Mhm.
think that's
Yeah.
where you try to drive scale. And your one to one groups can fit in there too, because when you do this one to one type stuff and these experiences and gifts, it helps when they've seen your brand. So yes, you do want to put thought leadership in front of them. You do want to put display ads. You do want to invite them to webinars. You want them to see your marketing emails. your one-to-one only gets better when you do that, but you can't expect to scale everything from
Right.
top to bottom, one-to-one, all the way to, big scale with one to many.
Right. And in the end, if imagining taking ourselves as an example, if we got a demand gen, lead gen agency coming to us and say, hey, we're going to reach out to 1,000 prospects per month or whatever. So, well, yeah, but what's the value of that if there will be zero responses, right? I would rather you reach out to just 5 prospects or 10 prospects per month and get 50% or even 30% of responses and engagement from them rather than 1,000 and zero responses. And I don't agree that that's not scalable. In my opinion, that has a space for the critical or strategic prospect that you need to get into. But like you said, it's part of the bigger play. If you want to go for one to many, etc., one to few, but those one to ones, you have to go this way. I don't think that there is. It's not that there's any way that you can make them work, from my point of view, but certainly you need to have that touch and that implementation of AI. I really found it super, super interesting. Sticking to this like very personalized approach and bespoke approach to these prospects, from your point of view, where do actually these buying groups spend most of their time or attention, if you will? So where do they actually spend the time where they will be in that buying mood, let's say, or open to new ideas?
Yeah. Honestly, one thing I'm seeing is a huge opportunity is call it the evolution of field marketing. I think field marketing has one of the best opportunities inside the go to market or a revenue organization right now
Mhm.
to prove value of their work. And some of the best field teams I've talked to, they already do this, what we'll talk
Yeah.
about. But what I've found is that a lot, they, they sort of reduce themselves to event marketing. And that's
Right.
different. Event marketing to me has a different connotation than field marketing. So field marketing is like deep research on your prospect, on your customers, using that research and information to create experiences in the field. Events are one of them, but private dinners, golf outings,
Mhm.
I mean, we're starting to do like rafting trips. We're doing yoga retreats, wellness retreats, ceramics classes, sushi making classes, like cool stuff, right?
Wow.
That's to me the evolution of field marketing. And you can actually determine how to scale that. I think it's smart to start small, like do
Hmm.
some research. What we do is we cohort and segment folks by those interests. So when you actually make an invitation or try to bring them into your world, it's based on something that they're interested in. We can talk about that a little bit. And the other
Right.
is when you're running these events, like actual events, like the typical, you sponsor Gartner, you sponsor Black Hat, that type of
Yep.
thing, have a plan. Every event in my mind should be at least 3 campaigns. You have pre-event activities, during event activities, and post-event. You need to have a plan for each of those. You need to have a one-to-one, a one-to-few approach within each
Hmm.
of those. You need to have really strong collaboration with sales, and you have to have account level plans. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're sponsoring Black Hat, you're a large cybersecurity company, you better know what companies are going to be at that event. And if you can't find out that information, like, you have to call me, I'll help you. But you need to know what companies are going to be there. And you need to know which of those companies are in your target list and which one sales cares the most about. And then as a field marketer, you need to wrangle in your demand gen folks, the folks that run ads, that send emails, that create content, and sales, and develop a company by company plan. So what I mean by that is, let's say one of those companies is, who's going to be a Black Hat. We'll just say Atlassian's going to be there, right?
Yep.
That's a target account. You're going after the CISO, VP of security, head of edge detection, head of fraud, whatever, who you're going after. Are they going to see some ads from you before the event? Are they going to get emails from you before the event? Are you going to host a pre-event experience? Can you learn what some of these people are interested in and host them in something really custom the day before the event and get to know them a little bit? So you have a leg up during the event. You can try to book meetings at the event, right? Like you
Mhm.
have to get really granular into the weeds there and facilitate that stuff. And it's a mix of digital, it's a mix of scale, it's a mix of one-to-one. But what I find is when you do that, you walk away from that meeting with an actual realization of that plan, right? So if you know
Mhm.
that there's 50 companies there you want to talk to and you walk away and you say, we got meetings with 25% of those companies, your CEO is going to be ecstatic. And then when you have the notes that say, we took this group of people out for 18 holes of golf in Vegas the day before Black Hat, and I got
Right.
to know the chief data officer or the chief security officer from Databricks or whatever it is, this is your salesperson talking, and then you can correlate that to the notes and you actually had a meeting with them at the event and you had a drink with them. You know what I mean? Like that's
Right.
the type of stuff that
Absolutely.
sells these enterprise deals. And salespeople know this. When I talk to salespeople, they get this. This is what they want. Everything
Mhm.
I just said they want to happen in real life. It's marketing's job to facilitate that. And I think it's, becoming a big responsibility for field marketing. And I'm here for it. Like, I think it's super cool. I've always had an affinity for field marketing. I've managed field marketing teams and, all the field marketers out there, my thing is like, you got a huge opportunity. You got to grab it and, go deep into AI in the world of, creating signals and demand gen and demand capture and kind of up level what you're doing today.
Right. That explanation to me sounds logical. Like that's what I believe that from a marketer point of view is what should be the baseline, right? The most minimum. But I don't have the feeling that that's the case. Do you think is because there's a lack of understanding or resources, or that people simply don't have that into the strategy yet because they're still too old school? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, in larger companies, it's almost predictable, and it's a few things because the first is call it, bureaucracy and organization design. So most enterprise level, even mid-market
Hmm.
marketing teams are set up by function. And so you have one head of marketing or VP of marketing, and then you have brand, you have website, you've got demand gen, you've got field, you've got life cycle, you've got operations, maybe customer marketing. And so by nature, your team is siloed. And the field marketing team, in big companies, they're running hundreds of events a year. And so what I'm talking about is pretty hard to scale to 100 events a year
Yeah.
unless you approach it like a village, right? Everybody
Mhm.
has to be involved. So your demand gen team is bolted in. They're running a lot of that pre-event awareness and pre-event activity. They're segmenting, they're personalizing campaigns, right? Doing that type of stuff. So field marketing still gets to do what they do best, but you've got to extend that and work with folks across your team. The other thing is, from that is like budgets are siloed. And so, field has their own budget, demand
Mhm.
gen has their own budget. Take media, for example, right? I've had a hard time getting demand gen folks to use media to drive event activities in the way I'm talking about because they have a very rigid ROI or return on ad spend model that they have to work with. And all
Right.
of that stuff is great. Sure, you have to do that, but like carve out a little bit of budget to test what I'm talking about and then measure it against meetings and revenue, not your
Yeah.
typical ad metrics. So yeah, that's one of the bigger things. And, I'd say just beyond that, it's logistics, which is, your tech stack might not enable you to have this complexity of campaigns. The way you manage, company and contact data might be a mess. And so it's hard for you to segment and cohort and do this kind of stuff. Um, yeah. Last one I'll throw in there is if you don't have a relationship with sales, you're screwed. We could spend a
Yeah.
whole podcast talking about that. So I'll
Yeah.
just leave it. I hope most marketers know that today, but sales is your customer. Treat them like that. And your job will get easier. That's my opinion.
That's so true in terms, at least for us, that's something that we see that sadly there's still that big disconnect or rivalry, let's say, between marketing and sales when actually, like you said, I love the way that you said, like, treat it as a village, right? Like everyone is in one pot. So one last question regarding to this that I have. So, do you believe that a brand must have a lot of resources before they can seriously consider field marketing, or because of the help of AI nowadays and all the structures they're able to build, which we said before is not that difficult to do, is a much more accessible strategy for new brands?
I think it's really accessible. In fact, I'm talking to a Series A company right now, marketing
Mhm.
team of one, and we're helping to shape what this event, a kind of in-person, one-to-one, one-to-few strategy would look like. And there's a couple things. One, AI, yes, we could chat about that, but there's another trend that I think is important, which I'll call like the decentralization of talent. There's so much talent out there right
Mhm.
now, and people that want to work in a fractional capacity, a part-time capacity.
Yeah.
So I think especially like a Series A type company, you don't need to go and drop, $150,000 a year on a big field marketing hire and then ask them out of the gate start running 2 events a month, right? That's
Mhm.
crazy. Just start with a local meetup, right? Like go into your database, go build a cold email list of folks that are in your ICP in a certain geo, host some kind of meetup, make it good, right? Like don't just buy pizza and beer and like expect a bunch of
A little
executives
bit
to show
special.
up. Yeah, like make it good. You can spend a few $1,000s on this. If you just raise, 20, 50 million, like you're fine. You spend a few
Mhm.
$1,000s on this and then run what I'm talking about. Like go deep on the research in your invitations, have a one-to-one and a one-to-few strategy in your invitations. So like the top most important people you want to talk to, invite them to something special, like before the event, get them there for a special dinner, like I've been saying, a golf outing, like something cool, then have the event. Everybody else, just get them to the event. Run that one time. If you need to, hire fractional event marketing
Mhm.
support. There's tons of people that can do this for, a couple $1,000. So let's say all in, you're 10 grand in on this
Yeah.
micro event you want to run. If you are targeting a decent size ACV, literally one deal is 4 to 5x ROI. Like who doesn't want that? And I'm telling you, this program works. You can run this you need like 6 weeks before the activity, the day of the activity, and then a couple weeks after the activity. Enable marketing, enable sales, get everybody together. Everybody's rowing in the same direction. Your goal for that month is to get as many butts in the seats at that event, and then do what I was saying, run the account plan, like be strategic about who's going to be there. Itemize within your team. The marketing person's going to try to bump into the head of whatever and shoot
Mhm.
the shit. Your head of sales, your lead AE is going to try to bump into the VP and talk to them, and you're gonna work the room, right? And so
Yeah.
that's the kind of stuff that gets overlooked. And again, I think all that's possible. And then AI, it's like AI can run circles around the data analysis, the segmentation, cohorting individuals, using research, and then personalizing outreach based on that research, right? So that stuff gets a lot easier, and what that should do is allow the team to actually focus on the human side of running that event, right? Like go there, talk to people, make relationships, be friendly, right? Like do that stuff.
100%. And you said exactly what I always say, like, keep it human, keep it real, like, keep real connections, real interactions and engagement and experiences with people.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the end, I've had so many times with clients and partners, whatever, calls, maybe 10, 20 calls before actually meeting them in person. It's such a different interaction, and the connection is so strong afterwards just by
Mm-hmm.
having that. So if you think about it, $10,000 gets you like a small booth in a normal event, not even like the big ones, right?
Yeah.
So if you think just ROI based, the actual ROI that you're going to get from that event that you're organizing yourself and planning properly who you're going to invite, doing those 6 weeks of reach out before an activity and 6 weeks afterwards is going to be so much higher than going to a proper event. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. I think
Mm-hmm.
that it's a different strategy for both of them. But if I had to choose personally, I would rather do what you described than just get a booth somewhere. I think that is definitely much better than just going to an event. Hey, we're here and that's
Yeah.
it. Because we've all seen that. Last week, we were in an event and you see people that, yeah, they're present in there. They've got like
Mm-hmm.
maybe two sales representatives, but they're doing nothing, right? They're just standing in there. They maybe have a couple freebies in there, and they're waiting to see what happens, right? And that's money that's just down the drain. Yeah, you're present, but there's no human connection or no real interaction, if that makes sense.
Agree. It's almost the version of an in-person billboard, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it's like you walk
exactly.
down the expo hall and you look at all the brands, and most people at those events, they don't stop by every single one, right? Like they go there for a reason. And I think that's the trick right there, is what's the reason for why they went to the booth, and how are you wrapping experiences around the core event, and then it can work. But yeah, that's people go there for like the after party stuff. They go there for the
Yeah, of
fun, like
course.
they go there for the
Of
happy
course.
hours, and so how do you turn that into a strategy?
Right. Now, we talked about organizing events and going places, getting the people that you're interested in. But in your experience, what percentage of a deal actually happens through somebody that is not going to be there, who is not going to engage, who's not going to reply to your email or even fill a form in your
Hmm.
landing page or in your website?
Yeah, if I had to make an educated guess, I'd say anywhere from you're probably around 10%, right? You look at most demand gen funnels holistically, and you analyze, where does awareness come from? Where does engagement come from? Where do conversions come from? Like, where do senior buyers versus junior buyers come from, right? You look at all of these dynamics. What I often find, and caveat here is, most of the work we do is with larger enterprises or companies that
Mhm.
are going after really large enterprises. A few things are true, and one is that the digital signals often are just signals. They're not true intent. The real
Mhm.
intent comes from the offline signals. So, the team or the person that attended an event, attended a dinner, was actually in person. Those things tend to be either deal starters or deal closers. And so, the attribution looks a little funny often, because if you're using just like basic last touch, it's going to look like events and field marketing are the strongest performing channel, which I do think they are. But what teams often miss is like multi-touch attribution, which looks way beyond that. And then when you do that properly, as you see that they've engaged ads, they've clicked stuff, they've been on your website, they've registered for webinars, they consume some content, right? And so you got to look holistically at it. But I think the slice of folks that convert, digitally, online, from A to Z, is shrinking, and it's something that we have to, as marketers, reckon with, right? And we have to
Right.
think, what are these channels actually producing, and in by the different variables of our go to market. So do these scale digital channels, they might drive, let's say you're a PLG developer
Mhm.
led software company, right?
Right.
Scaled is the way to go, right? Get that PLG inbound motion working, scale the crap out of it, right? I'm all for that. But
Yeah.
when we're talking like sales led, what do those digital channels actually do, right? Do they
Mhm.
drive demos with C levels? Probably not. Do they drive demos with VPs? Probably not. Can they
Mhm.
drive demos with junior folks? Yes, we see that all the time. The primary contact on opportunity is someone junior because they signed up for a demo. But guess what? They're just researching for the C level. And the
Of
C
course.
level is the decision maker. So how are you going to go after that person? You cannot put a demo CTA in front of that person, right? It's all about thought leadership and brand and connecting them with other executives at your team. So I think the complexity is in the orchestration and how you segment and
Mhm.
cohort and how you run your campaigns. But yeah, you have to. It's a great question, and I think actually, most teams should try to answer that for themselves. Like, what is the answer to that for me at my
Right.
company with my funnel?
Mhm. So we talked about scaling right now, and one of the things that I assume that happens quite a bit is that you find that an agency is maybe over-indexed in one single channel; they're pushing just too much. So, what is the way of correcting that without blowing budget, if that makes sense, right? So,
Mhm.
how do we change the direction in your experience when something like that happens?
Yeah, I mean, first, let's chat about why, an agency gets over their skis in a certain channel, right? And I'd say One is that that's all they do. So because of that decentralization of talent I talked about, you have a lot of new, call them micro agencies. I'd say, 12th agencies included. We're a small business, right? I don't employ hundreds of people. And these agencies are specialists in LinkedIn. They're specialists in Google Ads, or they're specialists in Reddit and Meta. And so it's natural. They're going to try to spend as much as possible in that channel because that's where their margin's going to come from. That's how they're going to put food on the table. And so there's that part of it, right? And so if you're a marketer out there and you employ multiple agencies that are channel specific, you're going to need to be the one that keeps track of that overall distribution of spend and understanding things like the point of diminishing returns and incrementality, because you will absolutely have overlap across those channels, and that will create a lot of waste and you'll burn a lot of money trying to figure that out. So that's one thing. The second, like, how do you fix that? I think it's a macro approach to your media. So if your media is distributed across multiple channels, one thing I think is incredibly important is incrementality. And so, like, for folks listening that aren't as familiar with that, it's basically figuring out, is the thing we're doing driving a net new outcome that we would have otherwise not gotten without that thing? So meaning, if I put $10 into a Google ad and I drive a demo request, was I going to get that demo request anyways, like organically, word of mouth, or did Google Ads truly drive that demo request? And if it's the latter, then you now know that that channel is driving incrementality, and that's an excellent sign. The next thing you want to figure out is the point of diminishing returns. And so what that means is, as we spend in a channel, at some point, the conversions you start to drive are not incremental, right? You're probably reaching people who were going to convert anyways organically, and you now happen to just touch them with media, which, again, big brands, a lot of them are fine with. They're like, whatever, we spend $50 million a year on media, there's going to be some overlap. The audience size is only so big. But for folks in like the mid-market and startup scale-up phase, those two things are really important to figure out. And then once you know some of that information to get out of it, I'm a big fan of just carving out 20% of your total budget purely for testing. So get that 80% working, right, across those channels, take 20%, test out new channels, make sure it's incremental. You can do incrementality across, you can do multiple channels, you can do a holdout group or like geo-based incrementality. But yeah, and then just test, keep testing, measure, test, measure, and keep doing that.
Okay. So we talked about how we fix that single channel over indexation and how we kind of spread to the rest of the options. However, and this hits quite close to home, even though we're just doing programmatic in our case, but how do you deal with agencies or final clients saying, hey, we have approached this account from all sides, right? We surrounded them like physically, digital, and everything, but there was no response, there's no engagement, there's no interaction from their end.
Yeah, so I can share. We use something I developed. This was kind of based on my experience at Google. Started looking at attribution through this lens. I call it an account progression framework, and it's a little bit like scoring kind of attribution, but at a company level. And what you need to do to set this up and then get value from it is first index and be clear on all of the accounts that you're targeting in any of your campaigns, and then create a framework that aligns to your ideal buying journey, AKA your funnel, right? So for simple terms, let's say it's awareness, engagement, decision, conversion, right? So you've got 4 stages in your funnel. Either make a big assumption or go back and look at the data to apply the KPIs that matter to each stage in that funnel. So for awareness, you're going to have, impressions, clicks, maybe website visits to certain pages, right? For engagement, you're going to have opens, you're going to have downloads, you're going to have registrations, webinar attendance, no shows, that type of stuff. For conversions, you're going to have, maybe form fills or strategic pages on the website that you're able to capture. So you plot all of the KPIs that are important against that framework. And then you want to do that ideally before you launch anything, because then once you launch activities of any kind, ads, emails, webinars, whatever, you then track the performance at an account level against all those KPIs. And so what you end up finding is over time, you should see those accounts progress towards a sales action that's lower funnel. And you can do two things. One, you can diagnose very quickly if they are not, because when you run this every week, it's going to say you're targeting 100 accounts. Last week we targeted 100 and 5 of them moved over a stage. This week we continued to target all 100. Nobody moved over another stage. What's happening? Quick diagnosis. You can look at the data. You can see which accounts are not progressing. Then you can get strategic about what to do. And then second, once you've done this enough, you create a baseline. And now you understand how long does it take to move an account from one stage to another, and what channels are important to move an account from one stage to another, what tactics, how many touch points do you need on average. So once you get the baseline, you can measure the whole thing against that, and you can determine the velocity of your funnel. And you can say, hey, we're either moving faster or slower than the baseline. And then again, quick diagnosis, and then you get and do something about it.
Right. That's one of the things, interestingly, because of course, from our end, we do B2C and B2B in both cases. And it's funny how you can see how B2B is behind quite a bit in terms of strategies and implementation to B2C. Of course, is much, much bigger, much faster sort of market. But when we talk sometimes say, hey, are you implementing any sort of view through attribution on your strategies, not just programmatic, but you use it Google, LinkedIn, social? Are you doing anything like that and seeing if people are interacting, just seeing the app, but then visiting the website? And in a lot of cases, we see that they don't even know what we're talking about, right? So that data that we have available, we don't have to spend more to get it, but we have available in order to make a decision. For me personally, is one of the things that I see that it's a shame that people don't take an advantage of that, because in general, at least for us in programmatic, we see how probably the difference between people clicking an ad and going to a landing page, or just seeing the ad without clicking and going to a landing page, is 300% higher, right? So you're having that effect. But if you didn't have that data, you would just think these ads are a failure, right? And that to me is one of the biggest pain points that are in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. And I mean, you touched on something that is, not just a pain point in, say, like advertising or programmatic or, marketing, but just data in general is a problem.
Totally.
Everywhere you go. And I think, people have heard this a million times, but the better you can wrangle that data and understand it and comprehend it, the better I think your marketing and your sales efforts are ultimately. So it's worth saying, all the stuff we're talking about, it does sit on top of some underlying, understanding of your data and how to track it, which I think even today with AI, like there's sort of, there's not really an excuse anymore, I think, to say my data is a mess. Like, granted, I get when your data warehouse is a mess and you've got multiple sources that aren't joined properly. But, in the absence of that, if you've got some kind of data lake or warehouse in place, like, you should be able to query that with AI and get some insights.
Right. I agree that nowadays there shouldn't be any excuse. No matter the size of your company or your agency, there shouldn't be any excuse to be able to organize and take some output and insights, actionable insights from those. As a last question before we wrap up, I would love to hear from your perspective, what is something that you think that is important in ABM and B2B marketing that people are not talking about enough nowadays?
Well, I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but I think one thing people aren't talking about enough is let me get a term on this, but it's actually, I just said the other day, I called it the AI slop apocalypse. So let's go with that. The slop apocalypse, right, is the fact that because we as marketers are all creative and we've been given these tools that can build and create for us, we are all building and creating like crazy. And it's awesome. Yep. It's very cool. I am in AI 70 to 80% of my day. I'm constantly building and creating new things, and it's super fun. It's super awesome. However, it comes with a huge responsibility to filter what you're doing before it reaches the market, and certainly before it reaches your buyer. And I think that's one of the bigger problems today, is whether it's ABM, demand gen, cold outbound, GTM, whatever it is,
Mhm.
everybody, especially on LinkedIn, is talking about how easy it is to essentially personalize and distribute at scale. That's
Right.
good. However, if it's so easy and every single company in your market can now do it, what have you done? Right? You've only made your job easier. You've made the buyer's job harder. And so I think we forget about that, because we're all sitting in our offices and we have goals and OKRs, and we look at the computer screen and say, AI helped me do this faster. I checked the box and I did it. All you did was create an output, not an outcome, right? And so I think
Yeah.
that's really big, and it applies everywhere, right? It applies to your ads, your creative, your messaging, your copy, your emails, your websites, your everything you're doing. So I really encourage folks to play around with AI as much as possible, but also establish a filter and make sure, like, is the thing that I'm creating going to deliver value to the end
Mhm.
customer or prospect, or is it going to materially, like, move the needle in the right way? Is it differentiated? Is it unique? I think that's key. We should talk more about
Right.
that. We should.
Yeah.
I think there's arbitrage there too, right? Where every company right now is just, like, I wrote a post the other day about, if I see one more Claude generated website, I'm going to go nuts. They're all the same. They're all tan. They're all burgundy and brown and red. It's like, it's the Anthropic color palette. And everyone's like, look at this
Yeah.
website I created in 2 minutes. It's like,
Well,
I don't care. Like, literally, you and 10,000 other people created the same looking website. Be creative. Like, be creative.
completely agree. I think that we're going to stick with that. Be creative. That's a wrap for today's episode of ASTRAD Talks. Again, Steve, huge thank you for participating and breaking down the playbook for us today. Guys, make sure to check out what Steve is building at 12th Agency. Follow him on LinkedIn for more blunt B2B insights and strategies. And we'll connect with you in the next episode of ASTRAD Talks.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate it. This was a blast. We'll have to do it again sometime soon.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Steve.